Into the Fold is a podcast on mental health issues, produced by the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health. I'm your host, Ike Evans.
Like any field, any area where human beings get involved. Human beings are human beings, and we don't change our minds because a bunch of scientists publish a set of recommendations and issue them. You know, honestly, and this is no offense to the Hogg Foundation or any other organization, but you all have been issuing white papers about topics for years. Those don't change public opinion. What changes people is the storytellers in our society. Human beings are storytelling creatures. That's how we best learn. That's how we best communicate. And so when the storytellers of our society tell their stories, they end up having powerful impact. And so I think you kind of have to, you look at the way different people are talking about their experiences. By and large, it's all well-intended. You know, there are people who were sexually exploited as athletes. When they tell their story, you know, Simone Biles telling her story, that's actually good for that. I think that's good for the field, good for our society. When Oprah shares that she had hardship growing up, I think that helps other people feel less isolated and less overwhelmed. The scientific underpinnings of this sort of movement that we're part of, this sort of effort to change a frame of reference, it's been there for many, many, many years. I mean, the basic neurosciences have been talking about this and studying this for decades. So even before I became a scientist, and I'm an old man, there were people that were studying the impact of certain patterns of stress on the development of the brain and functioning. So this is not a new story. It's an old story. It's just systems take forever to change, and the dominant perspective, the medical model and the current DSM-driven mental health model are going to take a couple decades to overthrow. But they're absolutely inadequate for explaining the current range of issues in I think it's basically the settling in towards something that's true. It's like gravity. I mean, no matter what perspective people take on this, ultimately there will be a convergence on the power of early developmental experiences to shape outcomes, and there will be a convergence on the power of relationships and the importance of relationships. It's like gravity. It's just, you can try to deny it, but ultimately it's going to settle in. So this is a trend. You may call this a trend. There are parts of it that are sort of movement-like and that are just sort of off target. But that's sort of a pendulum swing. Ultimately, the power of factual content is going to drive this. I've known Oprah for about over 30 years, and our relationship started out basically because somebody that she knew about my work, and I think most people listening know that she herself was a victim of abuse as a child, and she hadn't at that time gone public with it. But as soon as she went public and talked about her own experiences, she really wanted to try to change things so that what happened to her wouldn't happen to other people. She retired from her show. She became a 60 Minutes correspondent, and one of the stories she was doing was about a program working with families and children that were impacted by domestic violence in Milwaukee, and that's one of her hometowns. And she went there and she was talking to people, and one of them mentioned that it was a clinical program that was based on our work, and that they were working with me. And she said, "Oh, I know Dr. Bruce." So she called me up and asked me to be on the 60 Minutes episode to talk with her about some of this stuff. And it was just things that we talked about many times before, and she just wanted it on camera so it could be part of this episode. And afterwards, her publisher asked her if I would be willing to write a book about this. And I kind of said to Oprah, I said, "Listen, I've already written a book about this and nobody is reading it. And, the people who are going to be influenced by what I have to say know where to find that information. And so I think you should write the book, Oprah, because people will listen to you and you'll reach an audience that would never, ever open up a book by me." And she said, "I don't want to write a book." And we talked about it a little bit and said, "Well, let's write it together." So that's how we ended up deciding to write this book.